The power of brand storytelling. Hi, I'm Darren McGraw. I got 30 years marketing, branding experience working for Universal DreamWorks, MCA. I did the marketing and branding for Jay-Z, Eminem, Limp Bizkit, Nelly Furtado, The Roots here in Chicago for this particular market. What I want to tell you about is your brand story. Here's the biggest thing that I can share with you as a business just starting out. One of the biggest pulls that I tell people to do is make sure that they are investing a lot of time into telling three important stories. Story number one, how did you get in this business? What were you doing? What was going on that led you here? For instance, I ended up teaching people about how to do badass branding. The link is in the description as well as on the homepage. I got into that because I was working for all of these companies and I was working at iHeart Radio, back then called Clear Channel Radio, and a hurricane called Katrina came 20 years ago. And since then, I've been running my own businesses online. And I started from a FEMA paid for a hotel running away from Hurricane Katrina because this Chicago guy knew nothing about hurricanes. And that's how I started. That's what is the beginning of how I got into the business. Then talk about your product or services. So you can put the story behind it. I teach badass emotional branding because becoming a brand gives you higher sales quicker, faster, at higher conversions, repeatedly at higher prices by being emotionally connected, being an emotional connector to people. You become the only emotional solution. Think about your favorite food. You don't want any other food but that food. Your favorite artist, your favorite films. You don't want anything else but that one. That's your favorite. That's how you become the favorite in any industry you have because you become the number one. But what I'm telling you right now is my group, Badass Emotional Branding, creates that opportunity. And what I'm giving you the opportunity to understand very clearly is how you can get into that, how you can emotionally stand out. If you got something to sell, I'm going to help you basically eliminate 100% of your competition because you become the only one. It's about being unique. That's what a brand is. So I told this great story behind it, right? Here I am doing all of these people and these sales and stuff, but I had to find a way to stand out and become unique. And that's what I teach other people to do, including you. That's my product, my service story, joining my Badass Emotional Branding community. I've told you my story about how I got into that business from a FEMA paid for hotel to now living in a downtown luxury building in Chicago, and where I started and how I was in radio and labels and all this other stuff. The last story you want to be able to tell is the one that has nothing to do with everything I just told you. So I can tell the story about the time Eminem decided to lick some security guard on the cheek on the face cheek at a University of Chicago event. He was doing a spring event for the University of Chicago and how crazy that was. Or I can tell you about the time I helped John Bon Jovi, kept him from falling off of the House of Blues balcony, or some of the other wild, crazy, or weird stories that happen in music and film. And that's a cool story. But I can also tell the story about how I was born with cataracts. Thus, I used to wear contacts, but now my eyes are need the glasses. And how I grew up that way, and what was that like, you know? Or I can tell the story about how I drove down to New Orleans 1,000 miles November in the early 2000s to take a job, my first job in radio. Or how, what it was like the time I met George Clinton, the godfather of funk, and what an interesting experience that was. Or my experiences with 50 Cent and how interesting that was. Or I could just tell regular people's story, things my mom taught me, things my grandmother taught me, things my sister taught me, things my father taught me, and my brother taught me. And the reason you bring those stories in is because they're real and they connect with people and they're the ones that matter. And what I mean by not, of course, they're the ones to me that matter, but what I mean, those stories make you a real person. You'll remember me now because I told the story about me starting from a FEMA paid for hotel, working for big companies, or the time Eminem licked somebody. I'm sure you'd love to hear more on that. Or, the funny stories that I learned from my family and from my friends. It makes me a real person and it gets people interested. Or I tell a funny story about something that made me laugh. Or, has this ever happened to you? If you tell those stories, you're going to come across more authentic, more unique, and people will do business with you. Did I earn your subscription? I certainly hope so. You subscribe here, you'll hear even more. In fact, I suggest you binge watch my content. Go for it.